The raw materials must be secured. The energy must be secured. The power, because energy is one side, but then you need the power and grid access is the other side, right? So that must be secured and on contracts. You need to have contracts on the EPCMs. You need to have contracts on the land. You need to have offtake agreements that are binding to secure this amount of money. It's not enough with MOUs and intentional discussions. You really need to make them binding and take or pay. So all of this must be in place. Otherwise, you can't raise this amount of capital. So it's really the devil is in the detail here and bringing it to a bankable level. And I think that the only way to get there is to work together with the banks, to work together with experts on the banker side and their advisors in terms of what they really need to sign this.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Climate Tech 360, where we connect with diverse voices in the climate sector to make informed choices in supporting the future of climate technologies. I'm your host, Samia, and today we're speaking with Kasia Ripberg-Wahlgren. Kasia is the Executive Vice President of Global Growth and the Hydrogen Business at H2 Green Steel, where she joined in September 2021. H2 Green Steel was founded in 2020 with the ambition to accelerate the decarbonization of industry using green hydrogen. Steel is the company's first industry vertical due to its technological and commercial maturity when it comes to CO2 reduction possibilities. The company is headquartered in Stockholm, Sweden, with its first plant in development in Boden, northern Sweden. Notably, the company has raised 2.1 billion euros in equity and has signed definitive agreements for 4.2 billion in project finance. That is phenomenal for a company that was established less than 4 years ago, especially for an early infrastructure or first-of-a-kind project. Kasia has been tasked with scaling up the company's 800 megawatt electrolyzer plant concept globally. She formerly headed up the vacuuming conveying division at PIAB, part of Investor AB, and before that was vice president of corporate innovation at Yara and headed Sandvik's fuel cell components unit. Kasia also sits on the board of PowerCell, a fuel cell company based in Sweden. In this episode, we talk about H2 Green Steel's fundraising timeline and the project milestones they achieved to be able to raise that capital. We're hoping that this conversation can support other climate tech founders and investors as they think about scaling up their early infrastructure or first-of-a-kind plants. And now, on to the episode. Kasia, thank you so much for joining us. I know that you have an incredibly busy schedule, so I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast.
It's my pleasure to be here. Looking forward to it.
Great. So a lot of what we talk about on this podcast is related to climate finance and this issue for climate tech founders around the challenge of raising capital, so both equity and debt, for these sort of first-of-a-kind projects, so things that have never really been done before. And there's definitely a gap in the market because it's easy enough to raise equity, which is quite expensive, but then to get from that to then be able to raise debt against these first-of-a-kind projects is really challenging. So we talk a lot about that on the podcast, and there have been very few examples of successful fundraisers. And with H2 Green Steel, it's actually quite extraordinary what you've done in such a short period of time. So the goal of this conversation, it's really to better understand the key milestones that you achieved to help unlock that capital so that other climate tech founders can use that as a model and an example for scaling up, particularly for first of a kind.
And let's just take one step back before into kind of go into the details. So basically, we were founded and you could say as an outcome of the Paris Agreement and also the customers buying steel, they couldn't find decarbonized steel products in the market. So the initial demand for such a product that we are now to supply to the market came from the customer side, and they prove a kind of a willingness to pay for extra for a green product. And that is a fundamental part of why we can raise capital, both equity and now debt. And so it's really about having the offtake in place. It's about our location, obviously, and it's about the regulatory framework in terms of ETS and CBAM. And then when we get into the timeline of our financing, yes, you're completely right. So the project was initiated, or the idea you could say was incepted in 2020. We announced the project in February 2021, and we did close our Series A in May. about 105 million US dollar or 84 million euro. And our equity base back then, it was really kind of, yes, we had some financial investors for sure, like Altor, for instance, and Exor. But we also had a big group of value chain partners, you could call it. So it was strategic partners in the sense of customers such as Mercedes-Benz and Scania. Marsigalia is another one, Kingspan is another one, but we also had more like equipment providers such as SMS Group coming in early. So it was really, they could see the need of supporting such an initiative to get green steel product to the market earlier than what the incumbent players would actually do.
And between that time where you incorporated in May 2020 and then the fundraise, what had you achieved as a company in order to raise that massive round? I mean, just even securing those partnerships takes a really long time.
No, so I would say that, again, where the project really started was in talks with the customer side. So we have the same founders as Northvolt, the battery producer. And it was at the board meeting for Northvolt where one of their main investors, which is Automaker, they talked about, okay, it's all great with batteries, and of course we need that, but what about how the car is made? What about the most polluting part in scope 3, meaning, and that is actually steel. So that is kind of where it all started, I would say, and where it all came from. So we had the demand there, and then we started to look at the different part. What will it actually take to make this fly? And we started that kind of dialogue. But what was really in place when it was announced in February 2021 was the site and the power allocation ticket, you could say. Because in this kind of business, when you want to build something that is constructed, you could say, around green hydrogen production, obviously you will need a lot of power. So that was in place back then. Then from February until our Series A, I would say that we were maturing on that in terms of offtake agreements. It was back then, it was obviously not binding agreements. It was kind of taking it from MOU forms to term sheets. And the difference there is basically MOU are very kind of high level, fluffy, intentional, whereas term sheet is still not binding, but they are very much, I mean, you have details on pricing, mechanism, price levels, duration, take or pay clauses, and things like that. And then the next step would then be to move them into long form agreements, which are binding. So that was evolving over this period. And then when we get into kind of the next step, so which was an announcement we did for our Series B. So that was in August 2022, so about 1 year later. A really crucial part of that, and that was 190 million euro, was that we had our first part of the environmental permit in place. That was really a big thing, I would say. So in Sweden, to build something like this, it could take like 5 to 10 years to get the permit. But what we did was that we divided the permit in two. So we first kind of worked with permissibility part, meaning that we could actually start to build the plant, but we had not yet the permit to operate it. And then we could run that part a little bit later because we really wanted to kick off the ground preparation and to start the construction, you could say, during the summer. As you're aware, we're building this plant close to the Arctic Circle, and it's highly preferable to start the ground preparation during summer. So we managed to get the first part of the permit in just 6 months, and that is a Swedish record. And that was obviously a fundamental part to raise more capital. But that, I mean, everything is run in parallel, so that is a crucial part. But we also had matured kind of the PPAs on the electricity side. We announced that also during this period, and we further matured a lot of offtake agreements. So that kind of enabled our Series B1, as we call it, where we had 4 lead investors coming in. That was AMF, GIC, Scheffler, and Altor. Altor was also part of the A round, but they were leading the B round. So that took us then to an additional 190 million euro.
And then prior to that, it looks like in December 2021, you announced some sort of a joint venture with Iberdrola. Is that correct?
Yeah, so think that was the end of 2021 that we signed an MOU to co-develop a plant on the Iberian Peninsula focused on so hydrogen and DRI, iron making only, with the possibility to add a steel mill at a later step. Because what the Central European steel industry needs is an efficient way to get green iron feedstock when they are transforming from blast furnace to electric arc furnaces. So we did see that the gap in the market, and the second best place to do that in Europe is the Iberian Peninsula. So that was indeed launched back then, and that's a project that we're still working on.
Can we talk a little bit about how your team was structured? Because you're doing all this stuff in parallel, which is absolutely necessary. You're doing the fundraise, you're securing the JVs, you're doing the offtake agreements, and you're getting the environmental permits, which you did in record time. I assume you have a group of people dedicated to each of those initiatives?
Yes. So right now how we are structured is that, so my team, we're working kind of with the early phase of new projects or initiatives around the world. So basically, we are taking care of finding new places, replicating what we do in our first project in places where we think we have bankable hydrogen-based cases. And we kind of hand over to another team when you are moving into construction. So we are not building, but they are building. And then they are handing over the plan to the future operational unit. And obviously, we need to develop these teams in parallel. And then we have a kind of a big backbone with technology, digital, procurement, finance, HR, public affairs that are supporting regardless of the maturity of a project. So that is how we are structured from an overall perspective. And obviously the finance team and the project finance part is a crucial element when we are moving into a little bit more mature phases of the project. The first phase is just equity.
Right. Okay. So how big, when you secured this sort of second part of your Series B, I don't know if you can recall, but how big was the overall team at that point?
Ooh, that's a very good question as well, because it really depends how you count. I do think that if the latest statistics, and we are recruiting like 10, 20 people maybe not every week, but every second week. When a week ago, the numbers I saw was that I think we had 200 direct templates right now, but then we probably have 150 consultants that are like working 100% for us. So we treat them as our own, you could say, but they are not actually on our payroll per se. And then we have, obviously, as we are building the plant in Boden right now, we also have a lot of subcontractors. So probably now, and that's also kind of growing every week, but a couple of weeks ago, I think we were like 400 workers on site. We aim to be at 700 within a month or so. And next year, we should peak at around 4,000. It's very kind of moving target, you could say. And back, I would say when I started in 2021 in the summer, I think we were about 30 people or 25, 30 people directly employed. Early 2022, maybe 60, something like that. And we are but we are obviously employing a lot of consultants as well, because otherwise we can't grow.
Right. By the time you raised the Series B, it sounds like, so consultants aside, you had raised over 200 million euro of equity. You had secured the site. You got the necessary environmental permits, and you also brought on strategics as well as financial investors with a team of 60.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, that's really impressive. Okay, so moving on to that. So that was the Iberdrola. In July 2022, it looks like you raised an undisclosed corporate round with Hitachi Energy, or you had some sort of partnership with Hitachi Energy, which then sort of folded into this larger 1.5 billion raise that you closed, which may have included the prior round in September 2023. And this was all for the Boden plant. Is that right?
So how we are structured is that all equity is coming in through kind of the top co. And that means that all our investors, they can benefit from all projects, you could say. But our debt structure is for per project, obviously, because it's project finance. So in terms of Hitachi, I mean, they are an important partner. And we have other examples as well. But what is quite interesting is that, again, back to how we were originally funded, where we had value chain partners coming in, Hitachi can provide equipment for our plant. They also want to buy green steel, and they can enable that by investing equity. So it's kind of a circular partnership, whatever you want to call it, but we are creating this incentives for our partners to actually make it work. Kobe Steel is another example. So Kobe Steel is the owner of Midrex, who is providing the technology for our iron making unit. And they have also announced an interest to buy green iron to their Japanese facilities. So we have many examples like that, but Hitachi Energy was definitely announced in July 2022, going in with an equity investment, but they are also equipment provider.
Okay, so can we talk about this? So in September 2023, you raised 1.5 billion, but at this point, you then also had a joint venture between the infrastructure fund manager Ardian and 5T Hydrogen, both of which were new investors. It says the private placement was also backed by other new investors, included Swedish National Pension Buffer Fund, Temasek, Swedish Pension Fund AMF. I mean, there's a lot of IKEA founder. There's a lot of stuff going on here. I'm curious if you could provide a little bit more info around sort of the milestones to get to that massive raise. And then also how you were able to raise in such a short time frame. I mean, pension funds are notorious for taking a really long time for due diligence, and you did this quite rapidly. So if you could talk a little bit about that one.
So I would say that we have been in kind of a continuous capital raise and project finance preparation since the inception of the company, more or less. Then obviously we have official dates when we have kind of announced things and released certain documents and so forth. But we've really been on a equity and also project finance and debt raise since we started the company. In terms of raising the 1.5 billion, that obviously comes together with their knowledge that we have the debt side line up as well. And we did announce let me see when that was around October 2022, we did announce kind of a debt commitment of 3.5 billion. And that was including many different partners, but EIB, so the European Investment Bank, was behind it. The Swedish Export Credit Agency was behind it. The Swedish National Debt Office was behind it, and also a group of commercial banks. And obviously, that can provide some comfort to the equity side that this project has what it takes to actually reach FID from a project finance point of view. So I do think that was a really crucial part to raise the 1.5. And without the 1.5, obviously we can't raise or sign the debt. So that was part of it. Then another part of this is that there are many different instruments that we use, and the ECAs, for instance, are also crucial for us to have an attractive, or actually to even get access to debt in the market. And as we knew fairly early on that we would buy quite expensive equipment from Germany, we could initiate the work with Euler MS early on to put up a structure and get the facility to get access to financing for that portion of the capex.
Okay. So in terms of the debt, that's obviously project finance. So there's a separate entity that's not coming into the topco. That's then potentially some of it is going to be secured by the equipment. Is that correct? As well as the offtakes.
Yeah, so we do have Euler MS, for instance, that is export credit for the equipment that we buy from Germany. And we do have equipment from SMS Group, and we do have equipment from ThyssenKrupp. So that facility can be used to finance that part.
Yeah. Okay, so in September 2023, now you're working potentially with a new infrastructure fund. Is that providing you with a different level of expertise from an investor standpoint? Because before it was just, sort of early stage venture capital, and then I guess strategics as well. But I wonder, how are you working with the different types of investors that you have on your cap table?
Yeah, you're completely right. So obviously early on, it was all about equity and kind of preparing for project finance. And during that period, we have recruited a team with a very deep expertise in the debt structure or project finance structure and how to work with the debt side. Obviously, yes, we are financing our plant, but there's also a lot of kind of adjacent infrastructure or outsourced activities that are financed through other vehicles or whatever you want to call it. And that's where kind of the infra funds are coming in more.
Can you talk a bit more about that?
No, I can't share the details about our structure, but this is a way for us. So certain portions of processes connected to the plant, we have outsourced for long-term contracts, which is very much suitable for certain infrastructure funds.
Got it. Is there anything else that might be useful for other climate techs or sort of infrastructure companies or startups to know with regard to this 1.5 billion in financing? I mean, it sounds like you've been working with strategics at this point. You brought in an infrastructure fund. You've been working with a number of pension funds for a while in doing the due diligence. You had already secured some offtake agreements, as well as, your PPAs for the energy for that plant. And you had also been working with sourcing your equipment, using that equipment to secure the debt. Is there anything else that I'm missing there?
I mean, in order to secure, because the 1.5 billion in equity is very much connected to, or it's actually now the total equity that we raised is about 2 billion euro, to be combined then with about 4.5-ish in total.
Yeah, in debt.
Yes. And that would only be possible if we have de-risked the project in all possible dimensions. So yes, it's kind of on both sides on the value chain. So yes, the raw materials must be secured, the energy must be secured, the power, because energy is one side, but then you need the power and grid access is the other side, right? So that must be secured and on contracts. You need to have contracts on the EPCMs. You need to have contracts on the land. You need to have offtake agreements that are binding to secure this amount of money. It's not enough with MOUs and intentional discussions. You really need to make them binding and take or pay. So all of this must be in place. Otherwise, you can't raise this amount of capital. So it's really the devil is in the detail here and bringing it to a bankable level. And I think that the only way to get there is to work together with the banks, to work together with experts on the banker side and their advisors in terms of what they really need to sign this. And that is also a negotiation, I would say.
So between September 2023, that 1.5 billion in financing, as until January 2024, when you really sort of wrapped up this massive round for the Boden plant, what were the key milestones that you achieved within that time period that enabled you to raise all that additional debt?
I wouldn't say that there's any kind of huge new thing that came in, because we have been working on this continuously for 2 years with the project financing part, and like for 3 years for the total. So it's more like we are closing certain CPs. So we are really kind of, it can be an outsourcing contract and financing in place. It could be that we have moved from term sheet to LFA for offtake agreement to reach the threshold they require. I mean, there are different. It's all about the CPs, I would say, to have in place for signing. And that is what happened, I would say. And obviously also the 1.5 billion equity that we announced was a crucial part of reaching the 3.5,
the debt,
or 4 debt signing. Yeah.
Okay. So in this latest fundraise, I guess your debt is secured by a number of different entities. How and when did you start thinking about setting that up?
I would say that it was from really the beginning. I mean, our CFO is coming from that world, you could say, and he understood that you have to do this very early. Should also say that, so our founders is the same as for Northvolt, and they have worked quite extensively with this, and they are some years ahead of us. So we did take some learnings from how they had structured their project finance as well.
So this plant was able to secure multi-year offtakes. I would imagine that whatever you did to secure the debt and equity for this particular Boden plant, do you feel like that can be replicated for the next one?
Yes, definitely. So the concept and how we work with project finance, the different instruments we use, all of that can definitely be replicated. But like I said, it might be different export credit agencies that we would work with, different banks, and so forth. But the concept can definitely be replicated. What is difficult though, is that, I mean, at the core of financing a project is obviously to have a case with acceptable returns. And if you are in the green kind of green tech space, whatever you want to call it, or especially in hydrogen, it comes down if your cost of hydrogen is hugely dependent on location. So yes, we can replicate this, but we need to find places where you can have an attractive business case. And that comes down to, for instance, do you have renewable energy at like abundance volumes? Do you have it at base load? Because that helps you to configure your capex in an optimal way. The green part, so the renewable part, helps you to have a higher premium because the customers they tend to pay significantly more if you have a fully decarbonized product than if you're just a little bit decarbonized. It's not linear, it's exponential. You also need to understand the regulatory system. So in Europe, you have ETS and CBAM coming in that can really influence the feasibility of such a project. So yes, it can be replicated, but obviously we need to find the perfect or strong locations to make it fly.
Okay, so let's just say I assume your team focuses a lot on that since you're the head of growth. So you've secured the location and then you want to try to figure out, power is critical to the process. So can you discuss aspects of the PPA? Is the energy provided from the grid? Is it fully green? Is there hourly matching?
Yes. So from a high level perspective, and now if we talk about the Boden case, so our project in Sweden. So the site, so Boden is located close to the Arctic Circle, and in Sweden we have 4 electricity zones, SE1, 2, 3, and 4. SE1 is the northern one, and Boden is located there. In this electricity zone, we do have a surplus of renewable energy, and so there's a big advantage about this surplus, but also that the mix is about 99% renewable and primarily from dispatchable hydroelectric power combined then with some fairly newly developed wind, meaning you have a very renewable and efficient energy system. So we will connect to the grid. We will buy all energy from the grid. And that's why to have this grid ticket, whatever you want to call it, to access to new grid being developed is crucial for our project. So we'll buy everything from the grid for the Boden project. We will meet what the requirements are for the EU Delegated Act on renewable hydrogen. And we also will consider hourly matching and geographical conditions in our energy supply for how we calculate CO2 footprints. So that is definitely something we will do. In addition to this, we will strive for, you could say, enabling additional renewables coming online in the future. There is a big demand for energy in the north, and we want to be part of adding new electron production. So it's not necessarily so that we would build wind farms, but we could act as an off-taker for new wind farms. So we also tick the box a bit, you
That's
could say, in the
interesting.
future for additionality.
Okay, great. And what about the iron procurement? How did you secure the iron?
Yeah, so again, that is a really crucial CP for a project like this to show that you can actually get access to the right quality of iron ore that we need, because when you are using a direct reduction shaft like we do right now, you will need a certain quality of iron ore. So it has to be what is called DR grade pellets. And it's not an abundance of that right now in the market. So we had to prove that we could secure that. So we are building our iron ore portfolio over time, and we had to secure a certain portion of that portfolio as part of the financing, but we have not secured all of the volume. All the volume is a portion that we had to prove, you could say, to our banks. So that is what we have in place now. I cannot share the length of the contract or anything like that because it's not official, but we have secured what we need for our financing.
And are there carbon credits at all in the revenue stack?
So this is a very interesting topic. We have, I shouldn't say lobbied for, but we have, our position is that you should not be penalized because you bring a product to the market in Europe that comes without any CO2 emissions in the process. And kind of the old way of allocating emission rights actually provide an advantage to the ones who are using the blast furnace route because they are polluting and they get emission rights. We wouldn't get anything. But that system is changing. So in the future, we will be able, what it looks like now, to actually kind of monetize on emission rights that we are not using. So to answer your question, yes, we are very much in favor to have that as part of the future revenue stream. Obviously, that will be phased out over time, but we should at least have the same. It's an indirect subsidy, you could say, and we should definitely have the same access to that as anyone else in Europe. This is for Europe.
So it sounds like finding the location is one of the biggest challenges, which I assume is the responsibility of your team. Let's just say, you've spent the time, you've you found the next location of the site. You've been able to figure out how you're going to source the power as well as the iron ore. Is the plan to structure that in the same way in terms of raising financing for a first of a kind, or will you mostly just sell spot price capacity?
No, at least for what we see now and for foreseeable future, we will have a very similar approach. And then the question is, how much do you need to secure, for instance, in the offtake? In terms of the Boden plant, our first project, we are the first one out, right? We had to kind of create the green steel market, and we've also sold green iron. So we had to create that market. And obviously, then you probably need to secure maybe bigger volumes than if you are coming like with your second project. That said, we will need to secure a certain portion of volume, both I would say on iron ore and energy and offtakes to have a bankable project.
Can you talk a little bit about how you work with your strategics? Are they, they're investors as well as they're buyers for your offtake agreements. In terms of investing, are they providing you with insights into how to scale and grow? I mean, how involved are they?
Not all of them, but some of them are. Some of them are kind of part of, you could say, an operational board or technology board where they provide knowledge, insights, advice, things like that. So definitely some, not the majority of them, but some of them are very much part of advising us how we should think and act and move. Yes, so that is. And then obviously, we have many on the customer side, but that's more pure commercial relationship, I would say. But they've also helped us in understanding what's important to them in terms of CO2 intensity, how they want to have that stipulated in the contract, and things like that. But that's more, I would say, on commercial kind of relationship. But then we do have this operational and technology boards that we work with.
And do you feel like they've been critical on the operational side? I guess what I'm trying to ask is it possible for a similar startup to really scale in this manner without having strategics involved?
I think there are two sides to that. I mean, it's just to have strategics involved and part of a board want solve the biggest challenge you have, and that is to find the right people to join the company, because that's the most important part. And we are recruiting globally. That number is also changing by the week, but I think we have about 40 different nationalities in the company already. And it's because the type of steel mill that we will build and operate is more common in the US. It's a mini mill concept. The type of DRI shaft or the iron production unit is very common in the Middle East. And 700 megawatt electrolysis is not common anywhere, right? So it's like we really have to recruit from all over the world people who have done it before or have a very kind of adjacent type of vertical knowledge. So that is the most important part. And I'm very happy that we so far have been successful in really finding these people with deep, deep knowledge in how to actually build and operate this kind of plants.
Right from the beginning, your team was really well positioned to scale this company. So your founders are ex Northvolt. Your CFO is an ex-banker. He's been thinking about the financing from the very, very beginning. How was the team structured originally versus now when you're in full scale sort of growth mode?
Yeah, so the initial team were more kind of, I shouldn't say generic in the sense, but they were more kind of strategic and with the knowledge for how to do this in from a high level point of view. But what was really important as we are maturing our project in Boden and as we're growing is to have deep expertise in how to actually design and operate, for instance, a DRI shaft. So we started with recruiting what we found to be kind of the global rock star, whatever you want to call it, for DRI, which is Durgesh. He had been working in the Middle East for about 20 years and done exactly this before, but of course not with hydrogen as a reducing agent for iron making, but rather natural gas. So he really knew how to do this, and we recruited him, and then he could recruit kind of his team. So he has recruited a lot of former colleagues from when he worked in the Middle East. And that's just one example. But then we have the similar examples for all critical parts of the production process, the technology stack, and so forth. Another obviously very core person for us is our CEO. He was joining officially, I think it was in May 2021. And he came with in his backpack, whatever you want to call it, being the CEO for Scania, a big truck and bus maker. And he brought in the kind of the customer perspective and what is important for customers who have committed to science-based targets. So that is also obviously a crucial element in building the knowledge and culture, you could say, of our team. But then since then, it is really about finding this best people. And obviously, we have a very strong dimension of focusing on diversity, trying to find talent from the full talent pool and not just 50% of what's out there. We have a 50-50 management team in terms of gender. And that is another crucial part of actually finding the best people around the world. So now it's all about experts to construct, build, prepare for operation, engineer the plant. As we are moving into the next phase during next year, we are obviously moving more into scaling up the operational part where we need to find operators, shift leads, maintenance people, safety people. I mean, all of that we need to recruit then. And then it's turning into another type of challenge, I would say.
So I guess in the first phase, you focused more on getting the right people on the management level. And then now that you're expanding from a plant perspective, it's really getting the right people on the ground.
You're right. There are two, but it's not only management right now. We are recruiting a lot of quite young people, but obviously they are not experts yet in their fields, but they are more like highly capable, analytical, with a passion to make a difference, you could say. So we are not a top heavy company per se. Now we do have people at all levels, but not kind of operational people yet, as we don't have any operations.
The purpose of this discussion was really for startup founders and for investors to look at you guys as a model for how to recreate this in their own companies. So if they're trying to create this very capital intensive startup that's sort of more of an infrastructure play, how do you do it? So we talked about the fact that you had the right team in place very early on, and we talked about how you have been working on securing the financing. It's been a rolling process. Like you're always fundraising. There's never a time when you're not doing that. And then also having the expertise, not just within the sort of project finance side, which is a rare thing for companies to do so early on, but then also working with the strategics and having the right people as you scale on the commercial side. I think the big challenge for most startups in the space is really on the commercial and on the growth side. Like, what are the milestones that you have to reach in order to get to the financing, right? The financing is it's an announcement to the world that, okay, we've gotten to the next stage and we've been able to raise the funding for it. But what's really happening on the back end is that you're securing those offtake agreements. Those MOUs are being converted into actual committed agreements. You're scaling from a personnel standpoint. Like those are the things that are happening in the background that people need to better understand.
You're right. I mean, it's really about the business case. It's about building the business. So obviously there's a special bucket for kind of green projects, but you still need to prove that you can pay your interest. And then, so that's the kind of the centerpiece. And then it's like, okay, how do you convince then us that you can do that? Yeah, you need all these contracts. You need to have it binding, and you need to prove there is a strong business case. So it's all about the business case and how you then de-risk it.
Can we talk a little about that? Was there anything that we haven't discussed in terms of de-risking this process for people on the finance side to issue equity and debt?
I don't know how big group you have that are from kind of the hydrogen world, but because there is one dimension. I mean, when we talk about what makes a project bankable, one part is obviously the offtake, and that's where our kind of project started. That we had to. They wanted the customer, mainly in the automotive industry back then, wanted to have a green steel product earlier than what the market actually told them that they could deliver, and they were willing to pay premium for it. That's the starting point to show there's a premium and there's a willingness to sign long-term agreements, because that's also not common in the steel industry. So that was one part. But back to the location part. I mean, location, and that is a bit sad because yes, you can't do this in central Germany or Netherlands or the UK. Unfortunately, where you have large steel mills today, you don't have the right conditions. And when I say that and go back to the hydrogen piece, is that today, when you want to produce green hydrogen, you use electrolysis, and then you need renewable energy, or at least fossil-free energy, to make that happen. You tend to talk a lot about megawatt in electrolysis. So how many megawatts do you have, or gigawatts? But honestly, what's important is megawatt times the hours that you can operate your electrolyzer unit, because that is what gives you the volume you need. And obviously, if you are operating it, let's say 8,000 hours per year, which is probably a likely uptime that you could reach, compared to if you would use your electrolyzer just 4,000 hours per year, which would be the case if you are lucky with a good kind of solar wind setup. You need to double your electrolyzer. That means you need to double your capex. And that means that your case is not bankable, because you have basically too much capex for the same volume of hydrogen that you would produce if you would have 8,000 hours. And 8,000 hours, that means baseload. So it comes to the location piece, that there are not many places in the world where you actually have that specific condition. So that is one part. The other part is that if you have this green or renewable conditions that we do, you also, like I said before, you do have the greenest product, and that then you would benefit from the highest premium. So you're kind of optimizing in two ways. You will have the lowest cost position because of an optimized capex and low electricity cost, which is another dimension of this location. And you have the greenest product, so you can actually benefit from the highest price. So you're kind of optimizing in two directions, and that makes your case more profitable than other cases, meaning bankable. So that is this kind of the base load piece. I know that many people think in a different way there, considering all the projects that are going on and on offshore wind farms and maybe in Middle East and so forth, where you don't have this green baseload yet. And hopefully that will work in the future when you have efficiencies up on the electrolyzer, capex down, so you can actually afford to oversize it. But today it's not the case. And we are looking for projects that you can finance before 2030. And that's why we're in Quebec, for instance, and in Brazil.
This was super, super helpful. It's amazing what you guys are doing. The growth that you've had in 3 years and the team that you've built, the offtake contracts that you've secured, the financing partners, I haven't seen anything like it.
No, it is. I mean, like it is, and it's also kind of a bit the perfect storm in one way, because we are because of the EU ETS and the CBAM as well. It definitely helps us, and that's why it's more complex to do this in North America. Now, yes, with the Inflation Reduction Act, you could do it, but it's still very difficult. What is really the strength of our company and our founders is that they can see things a little bit before when other people can see it. So they were really right on time to get this power block in northern Sweden and really kick off. So
yeah, so that's the final piece. Timing. The timing was right.
Yeah, timing is right. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kasia. I really appreciate it. And that is it for today's episode with Kasia Rittberg-Wahlgren. If you found it useful, please subscribe and write a positive review because it helps people discover the podcast. Thanks for listening and catch you at the next one. Bye, everyone.